TVI looks at the plight of the British fishing industry. Skipper George Kent says they'll have to change tactics.
I've always been an honourable man and I've thought that we should always abide by the rules, but I'm beginning to think otherwise now. I'm afraid a few more people are as well.
In Holland, evidence that the Dutch make fishing pay by breaking the rules.
I think everybody is policed, but you can, if you are clever, you can be ahead of the police.
Next week, Britain goes into crucial common market talks. Who gets what in the Euro fish pool? The reporter, Brian Gould.
As Britain's fishermen sail out to meet a new dawn, it's not just the hazards of the sea and the uncertainties of the catch that worry them. Their future now lies with the politicians, the common market fishing ministers whose negotiations broke down last month. They try again next week.
I'm extremely pessimistic indeed about the future of the British deep sea industry. I must say that I take a very sad view about the future of the British fishing industry as a whole, because I do not think that it is possible for justice to be done to Britain on the common fisheries account.
When Britain joined the EEC, we claimed only a 12-mile limit, like most other countries. After the Cod War with Iceland, we extended our waters to 200 miles. But as common market members, our 200-mile zone didn't belong exclusively to us. It went to make up nearly 70% of a Euro fish pool, shared with other common market countries, who could therefore take advantage of our rich fishing grounds in the North Sea. The result, says the industry, has been disastrous. Not only must Britain share its own waters with the common market, we've also lost our concessions in the 200-mile zones of other countries. The future of ports like Grimsby is now in jeopardy. Grimsby remains the country's biggest fish market, but most of the distant water fish now landed here isn't British. This trawler, back from Arctic waters, is Icelandic. As foreign fleets flourish, the British deep sea fleet has slumped from more than 500 vessels 5 years ago to less than 100 now.
We are giving away very substantial quantities of our own natural resources to the rest of the community without royalties, without rents, without rates, without taxes, without any comeback of any kind. And even on a favourable outlook about the outcome of the current discussions on the common fisheries policy, it looks as though the United Kingdom will be giving away at least £250 million worth of our natural marine resources every year in perpetuity. And this is totally absurd. It couldn't possibly happen in any other sphere. And it's a matter of amazement to me that it's being allowed to happen in this sphere without the media and the British public saying Dicky Bird.
It's the men at sea whose jobs are most directly threatened by the fishing industry's problems. But for every fisherman at sea, there are at least 6 jobs on shore. Jobs like those of these Grimsby dockers, known locally as lumpers, working all night to land, sort and prepare for auction 140 tons of Icelandic fish. Fishing's future has been put at risk, according to John Davis, an advisor to the industry, from the moment we joined the Common Market 6.
I've always compared it, the original 6, with a gang of petty thieves that set out to rob a sub-post office. Because that's what they were trying to do, and they were really trying to get just the 12-mile limits around our shores and around Norway's shores. But of course, in the interim, along came 200-mile limits. So this gang of petty thieves, instead of a sub-post office, suddenly found a bank with the vaults wide open.
The buyers at the Grimsby auction aren't at all concerned where the fish comes from, as long as supplies are available.
57, 56, 55...
But for Britain's negotiators at next week's talks, it does matter. Their task is to ensure that British fishermen have a fair chance to compete in their own market. The Agriculture Minister, Peter Walker, says we need a common market policy if fish stocks are to survive.
You have a situation where the waters of Europe genuinely are waters of Europe. Fish have no great respect for boundaries and frontiers. And if, for example, the other countries of Europe pursue policies of overfishing, it would affect the fish that would then come into what would have been our territorial waters. And a great number of the breeding grounds of fish for Europe and fish for British waters in Europe are outside the British territorial limits. As if we went for a free-for-all and we said we'd have all the fish in our limits and they could have all the fish in theirs, they would have all of the fish in our breeding grounds. And so it does make a great deal of sense to have a European policy on fish.
BBC Radio Humberside, News Time.
There's been a severe setback in the common market fishing talks.
For sale, what's left of the British deep-sea fleet. For prospective buyers, just one word of warning. These boats are laid up because they've got nowhere left to fish. Hull, once the capital of the deep-sea industry, now looks more like its graveyard. These boats should be fishing in Norwegian waters, but following the breakdown of the talks, the Norwegians have banned all common market vessels until the EEC can sort itself out. And that's a body blow for trawler owners like Thomas Boyd.
If you look outside this office, you will see that all our vessels, every single vessel that the company possesses, deep-sea vessel, is tied up outside. And they are tied up outside because of lack of fishing opportunities, not because we are unable to make the vessels operate profitably. We have, certainly in the port of Hull, we have very sophisticated, highly efficient freezer vessels. And to date, the conditions have been non-existent whereby we can operate those profitably. We just simply have not had the fishing opportunities.
Every day of enforced idleness for the Arctic Galliard and the other 6 vessels in the Boyd fleet costs the company £1,000 per day per boat. Little wonder they're desperate for an EEC agreement at almost any price. As the Norwegian ban continues, skipper George Kent spells out the consequences. How long since he's been to sea?
We docked on the 10th of December from the mackerel grounds.
And is it usual to have the ship laid up for that length of time?
No, we would have been away within 2 or 3 days. As soon as we got landed, we had opportunity to fish somewhere.
And why aren't you?
Well, because of this ban on the Norwegian business, we'd have definitely been up there at this time of the year, which is, we regard it as one of the best times of the year for fishing.
And is it a serious matter for you that you're not there?
Yes, it's very serious, yes.
And what would happen if the ban continued?
Well, I don't know. It'd be a great loss to this fishing industry, and we can't afford to lose that. Them fishing opportunities up there.
How many men are employed on this ship?
32.
And what are they doing at the moment?
They're all on the dole. Nothing.
And they'll stay on the dole until some
They'll stay on the dole
comes.
until such times as we get somewhere to go.
And what are you hoping for from the politicians who are involved in trying to raise
Well, I hope
ban?
they take their fingers out and just realise what's going on, and try and get us a few more opportunities, and you'll be able to employ a lot more people.
With nowhere to go, how long can Boyd's fleet survive?
Well, at the moment, because of restricted fishing opportunities, we are unable to service our borrowing, and that means that we have to sell ships to survive. And we've been pursuing a policy of selling ships as hard as we possibly can. And we have 7 ships left at the moment, and we have to sell more.
6:30 on a cold January morning in sea area time. The deep sea fleet may be laid up, but for middle water and inshore fishermen like Frank Reed and his 2-man crew, it's business as usual. Six miles offshore, and with dawn still an hour away, the net is let out. The bad weather means they can't go out too far into the North Sea, and that will limit the size of their catch. The chances are that today they won't do much more than cover their rapidly rising costs, and they complain that the price they get for their fish hasn't kept pace. What value of fish must they land to break even?
Just to make the job pay without getting anything out of it, I would say about £200 a day.
And are you catching that amount at the moment?
Some days we do, some days we don't, obviously. But the way the weather's been lately, we haven't been getting to see in actual fact.
As the weather improves in the coming months, Frank can look forward to more profitable catches. But that depends on there being fish left to catch. Our other common market fishermen as concerned as he is about conserving the fish stock.
No, they've proved that themselves. There's no fish around their coast, is there? That's why they want to come here, to clean up what bit we've got.
But wouldn't you be happy with a quota that would enable you to catch a certain amount of fish?
It's all right them establishing quotas, but it doesn't say that the fish is going to be there to catch that amount of fish.
Midday, and the moment of truth approaches. They've been towing the net for 3.5 hours. As they haul it in, they're 14 miles offshore, well out in the Euro fish pool. In these waters, there are always other boats close at hand, many of them foreign, all competing for the catch. The common market boats are subject to quotas.
Hey, get up!
Frank's catch will be recorded and will count against the British total, and British fishing inspectors enforce the rules on quotas very strictly, even though they depend on a gentleman's agreement to which we weren't even a party. Today's catch, mainly prawns, will be modest. British fishermen fear that Britain's quota under a new common market fishing policy will be equally modest, and they also think that they'll lose out on the vexed question of who can fish where. With the deep-sea fleet laid up, even inside the Europool there are problems. So far we've been allowed to retain our exclusive 12-mile limit, but last month's talks broke down over French insistence that we should have only 6 miles as from the beginning of 1983. And as this shot from Frank Reed's boat shows, 6 miles isn't far. The lights on shore are still clearly visible. The French bombshell was the main talking point at a crisis meeting of fishermen from the main English fishing ports. Were they happy?
No. Not really. Considering the fact that we set out asking for 50 miles, and we're now being offered or told we should accept 6 miles with some favourable aspects out to 12 miles, how could we possibly be in favour of it? No way at all.
How serious would it be if you had to accept that?
They may as well come short to shore, because it's the 6 to 12 is some of the most important spawning grounds, and they'll just devastate them. If Mr. Walker's been threatening us by 1st of January 1983 it'll be short to shore, but that threat doesn't matter. If they're only offering us a 6 mile limit, they may as well come short to shore, because they'll be doing far too much damage anyway. We can forget it. We had an incident. We had an incident before they closed the herring ban. We were trawling just outside of, well, between the 6 and 12 mile band. There was a fleet of about 60 Dutch trawlers, and one of them tangled my gear. My boat was only a 50-foot boat at the time, and there's this 120-foot big Dutch stern trawler. He tangled our gear, tore it in half, and we chased after him, trying to get it back. No understanding, no understanding. So we threatened to drop an anchor on his net, and we'll heave up. And when he heaved up, there was our net. And he told us, he says, that the best thing you could do is to stay inside 6 miles. Now this is 120, 130, up to 150-foot trawlers telling us, if they're coming to 6, we've got to stay inside of 6. Now where does that get us?
May I come in on that? It's probably not quite as important in the immediate future, the 12-mile limit, as quotas are, because very, very few Grimsby boats actually fish within 12 miles of the British coast. But if you destroy the fleets of Bridlington, Scarborough, Whitby, you're destroying the whole of the British fishing industry and the infrastructure and the backup. And so eventually the pressures are put on more on every port.
Those pressures include the strict enforcement of the rules by Britain's fishing inspectors.
Every week we come in the harbour, every day we come in the harbour, there's a Ministry of Fisheries man there telling you what you've caught, knowing what you've caught. He sends that direct to MAF, Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, and they always know to within a fortnight how much fish has been caught in Britain. Now you go to France and ask them how much they've caught. They go to the ship's owners and ask them how much their vessels have caught.
Don't just blame the French. I think it's from Skag and down to Sicily, from the northern Denmark, a whole lot of them. The only ones who seem to get the returns correct are Luxembourg, because of course they haven't got a fishing industry.
We then asked them about a new species of Eurofish, one we hadn't heard of before, but which the fishermen seemed to know well. What was this new Euro species?
They're blackfish.
Over the quarter fish that's cash is paid for it. It doesn't go through any books. It's not recorded. It's blackfish.
There's no
tax paid on it either.
Fish that you aren't allowed to catch, that's been caught,
Could be
landed illegally.
And it happens in Holland all the time.
You're aware of this happening, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Holland,
But try to prove it.
We went to IJmuiden in North Holland, the most important Dutch fishing port. It's important to the British consumer too, especially to those who eat fish fingers. Britain's big frozen fish firms like Ross and Birdseye make large purchases here because the price is lower and supplies are more plentiful, something that irks British fishermen who claim that the Dutch industry is booming because they aren't properly policed.
I think everybody is policed, but you can, if you are clever, you can be ahead of the police.
And do you think Dutch fishermen are not only hard-working but also clever?
Of course they are clever, otherwise they wouldn't build so many nice big boats.
And indeed they are. At this small shipyard near Rotterdam, 3 new beam trawlers are being fitted out. 12 were built last year, and they have 12 more orders on the books. All the new trawlers will have much bigger engines so that the size of catch can be increased. But the Dutch are, after all, subject to the same rules as we are. So how could they expand their fleet when the British fleet is declining? At IJmuiden Fish Market, we found proof of how they managed it. Each boat's catch had been labelled, but we noticed a different label, a big V. An official was quite openly placing the V labels on groups of boxes. The more we looked, the more V labels we saw. We checked out our suspicion that V-labelled fish is outside the quota.
Can you tell me what the V means?
That's a code number.
Yes.
The code for the ship.
But there were V's on fish from all the ships.
Yeah, that's a kind of code.
Yes. What does it mean?
It has no meaning. It has no meaning at all.
But some boxes of fish had the V, and other boxes of fish had the number of the ship.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, yes, it is just a code, nothing else.
But who's it a code for?
I can tell you.
You can't tell me. But this man just gave it to you. Can he tell me?
Yes. I don't think he will tell you.
Why won't he tell me?
You know, the fish is quoted. And all ships have just a part of it.
Yes.
That's to say they have about 50 boxes for a night. But if they have 51 boxes, or more than 50, they will sell it at that number.
And that means it's outside the quota?
Yes.
And that happens with most ships? Yes. Thank you very much indeed.
Are you interested in it?
Yes, very interested, yes.
Why?
Well, because in Britain, the fishermen say that they have to stick to the quotas. What do the fishing inspectors say about it? Yeah. Do they know about it?
I think so.
You think they know? But why don't they do anything about it?
Well, I don't know. Just
do you think it's they're persuaded not to take any notice?
The embarrassment was obvious. Perhaps he hadn't intended to reveal quite so frankly that the V labels did indeed signify fish sold outside the quota. We were subsequently told that 50% of all the fish landed and sold at this government-run auction is outside the quota, and that without this systematic breach of the rules, IJmuiden's prosperity would be seriously affected. We also learned that fish processing firms took black fish from their own boats directly into their factories. The port's fishing inspector had been conspicuous by his absence. Locals said an inspector who took his duties too seriously would end up in the harbour. We eventually tracked him down. What is this V label?
I don't know. This is, secret.
It's secret?
Secret.
It's a code?
A code, yeah.
To do with the quota?
From quota is that a code, yeah.
And does it mean that the fish with this number on are over the quota?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I don't know.
But you're a fisheries inspector.
Yeah?
Why don't you know? Who prints the label?
I don't know.
Who is the man who puts the label on the fish? As the Dutch fishing industry goes from strength to strength, and other common market countries also manage to get round the rules, British fishermen like Frank Reed are understandably angry. They fear that even if the negotiations in Brussels are successful, an agreement which they have to honour, but which others ignore, would be worse than no agreement at all. How important is the 12-mile limit?
It's very important to us, because access means that you can obtain your quota of fish that much cheaper and to the benefit of the local community. So it's a very important principle.
You say it's important, but is it a sticking point?
Well, of course it's a sticking point. That's why the negotiations broke down last time. Of course, what the French were demanding on access was unacceptable.
So you wouldn't agree to a deal which meant a 6-mile limit with some extensions out to 12 miles?
No, of course not.
As you know, it's often said that Britain contributes about 2/3 of the total common market fish stock. You seem ready to settle for a quota which would give us just over 1/3. Indeed, the industry claims just over 1/4. Why is that fair?
I'm not in the game of undermining those percentages because I'm in a negotiating position. But if on the important species that are involved, we obtain a guarantee quota which gives our fishing industry a bigger proportion of fish in European waters than they've caught in the past, then we will have achieved a successful negotiation.
Don't you think there's a risk that you might be misled in your negotiations and make concessions for the sake of a small percentage increase in the quota, when in fact the quota doesn't really matter because other countries pay no attention to them at all?
That is why, with the total support of the industry, I've succeeded in getting the Commission to put forward proposals on control, which will mean that there's an independent inspectorate systematically looking at every country to make sure they are complying with the quotas. And of course, if there was no such inspector, it would be a very real danger. And we wouldn't accept a common fishing policy that didn't have a proper system of check.
Why should 40 common market inspectors, with all the hundreds of ports there are, and the hundreds of thousands of tons of fish landed each year, why should they make any difference in the face of that long practice of avoidance?
Well, because if you can, 40 inspectors spending the whole of the year with the powers of inspection of records and of documents and of boats and of ports will be able to expose any country that is pursuing those sort of policies.
But what you seem to be saying is that the existing quota system is not enforceable and indeed not enforced. Why then are we enforcing it?
Well, I'm sorry, other countries are enforcing it. And there have been exposures of those countries that haven't done it. And the fact is that we want to pursue a policy of conservation because it's very much against the interests of our fishermen. If we turn around and say, right, chaps, don't bother. Some other countries don't enforce it. Overfish. Destroy what remains of the herring stock. Destroy what remains of some of the stocks of the important future for your fishing. That wouldn't be in the interest of British fishing. And nor have British fishermen ever asked us to do it. In fairness to them, they never said, you know, we want you to stop all this quota system and allow us to fish everything, because they know their whole future would be destroyed.
But as a confident Peter Walker tries to get the British fishing fleet back to sea, John Davis, advisor to the industry, takes a more cynical view of its future.
There's probably, in my estimation, a decade of fishing left around these islands. And that raises a new problem for us too, because we've now accepted a new morality. And we have to play the same game as they did. We accepted cunning and deceit. We've now said to them, right, we agree, that's the way you run things. And we've put our signature to it. So that's the way we're going to do it too. So from now on, we've got to cheat as well. Because if we don't, we'll lose everything eventually anyway, but we're going to lose in the interim. So we might as well do the same as the rest of them.
What do you mean by cheat?
Well, there will be paper rules, which, as has been the case for the last 8 to 10 years I've been associated with this common fisheries policy, have been ignored. They will continue to be ignored, except if the government has its way in this country. Well, the government's going to have to do the same as the other governments and turn a blind eye. And the fishermen are going to have to ignore the quotas. And they're going to have to do the same as the French and the Danes and the Dutch and the Germans and just go out and catch fish. Forget the future. Forget about conservation. That isn't going to matter anymore. So either our civil servants, our fisheries officers, have to be corrupted, or maybe they have to be coerced. Perhaps a few have to finish in the dock before the matter's sorted out. But I don't see how the government can now enforce our fishermen to follow the rules when they've accepted a new morality and a new set of rules.
Those new rules could emerge from next week's talks. But even if they do, if the new rules are treated with as little respect as are the present arrangements, the seagulls following Frank Reed's boat home could seem more like vultures.